To Local Heroes here on WKFK TV 7, where we interview veterans of the military and we preserve their stories, unedited and unchanged. So join us now for Local Heroes. Hello and welcome to Local Heroes from the GI Museum in Goshen, Mississippi. Tonight, our special guest is Mr. Jerry Dildy, who served 41 and a half years in the United States military and the National Guard here in Mississippi. Welcome to the show, Jerry.
Thank you.
First question tonight, Jerry, would be, how did you get into the military?
Well, back then you had a 6-year obligation. So as soon as I hit 18 and signed up for the draft, I went over to Naval Reserve and joined the Naval Reserve.
In Gulfport, Mississippi?
In Gulfport.
Okay.
And then I was in junior year of high school, so I quit school and went on active duty. And I stayed on active duty for 25 months. I was supposed to stay on for 2.5 years, but when Korea was shorting up, they gave an early out. So I didn't stay the whole time. I got an early discharge.
And what were you doing while you were in the Seabees, Jerry?
I was a construction mechanic, and I had a chance to go out at Port Hueneme and learn to be a mechanic, and that's what I was after, because back then they didn't teach shop at the schools, and I wanted to be a mechanic real bad, so I went on active duty.
And when you got off active duty, you decided to come back to the Mississippi coast?
Right. And I found out that while I was on active duty, if you don't have a high school education, you're just a dummy. And so I went back to Biloxi High and went on GI Bill and finished my senior year there. And while I was at the high school, they didn't have any CB reserves in Gulfport. It was Fleet Reserve. So Tommy Monroe, which is a general, and 2 full-time employees from the National Guard came to talk to the seniors, and a bunch of them joined the National Guard. I said, wait for me. As soon as I get released from the Navy, I'll be with y'all. And I got in the National Guard.
And your unit was in?
138th Transportation Battalion was in Biloxi.
Where was the location?
On the point where the Seafood Museum used to be.
Right, where the old Point Cadet hangar and
Right, it was the Coast Guard base, and when the Coast Guard moved out, they turned it over to the state, and the state moved the National Guard down there.
So while you were there, y'all an amphibious unit? Were you?
Not yet. We was a light truck unit. We had a company in Ocean Springs, one in Pascagoula, and one up in Wiggins. And then we got reorganized, and we became an amphibious unit. And that's when we got the ducks.
DUKWS, right?
353.
353. That's the old World War II amphibious truck, basically. A 2.5-ton truck with a boat hull on it, basically.
Right. And 72 horsepower. But riding it on the highway was the smoothest thing because that hull was heavy and everything, and it was a lot better than in a 2.5.
Now, this was before the new bridge, or was it right after the new bridge?
No, it was before the new one.
And y'all used to put the ducks in the water at the old Coast Guard Air?
Well, Keesler Field moved a crash boat crew from where the Biloxi Small Craft Harbor is to the point.
Oh, okay.
And there was a fence in between us, and we had a wooden ramp that the Coast Guard used right there by the hangar, and then they had a good cement ramp on the other side with Fish and Wildlife, and they had a Loran A station over.
Well, for those people that can remember it, or it may still be there, I'm not familiar, it's kind of like a big step, and they all built there was a wooden ramp built over those big concrete-looking steps there by the Point Cadet hangar. Is that where that was?
Right. Yeah, in fact, and that was one of my first jobs was to go over to Pascagoula, borrow a big truck, come over there, and they loaded up all the wood, and they tore up the wooden ramp and put it on a lowboy, and I took it up to Camp Shelby. And I don't know if they ever used it or not, but.
And I think you were telling me that the fill up underneath of there, the concrete was from some.
Was from the 47 Hurricane.
47 Hurricane. And
when they redid the seawall and they relaid the sidewalk.
And
all that, and that was tore up because that's where the bridge was originally supposed to come in at, but they moved it further over when they finally put the bridge in, the new bridge.
So y'all were using the old building where the Seafood Museum used to be, and y'all were using the Point Cadet hangar to put your trucks in.
Right.
And there was a smaller building there. It used to be an engine shop in World War II, and you were using that to work on things, or?
Well, our shop was a maintenance shop that they had, that the Coast Guard had, was right next to the seawall. And you probably went over the bridge and looked, and it, when we left the point, the shop became the Biloxi Boxing Club.
Oh, I remember that, yes.
And that's where our shop was. But then when we got the locks, they was too big to go in that shop, so I had to work on them inside that hangar.
It was one of the interesting things you and I have been talking about over the years. I've known you for quite some time now. Right there next to where the old bridge was before the Hurricane Katrina tore it up, there used to be a big concrete-looking bunker. What did they do there?
That was the ammunition bunker that belonged to the Coast Guard. They had, for World War II, they was making trips out in the Gulf and everything, and it was ammunition bunkers. We never did use it. It was actually right in the middle of where separated our property, the National Guard property, from the Air Force.
But I remember seeing it. You actually showed that to me. It was
Right.
quite interesting.
Well, it's now buried underneath a bunch of dirt over there.
Where the new bridge went by.
Right.
So you had the ducks, and you were working with the ducks. What were y'all doing? Were you practicing? You moving things? What were you doing?
Well, we was an amphibious unit, and you used the ducks to pick up from a ship and bring it in shore, go so far in the shore instead of like a Mike boat or LCVP, they had to go at the shoreline, and that's as far as they could go. But the ducks could go further inland and unload and go back out again. And we used them out in the Gulf, but that salt water would give them fits, and being iron and everything, and we had a rust problem fighting with them.
Well, they were World War II vintage.
Right.
And you had to keep them going.
Yeah.
And did you ever take the ducks out to Deer Island?
Right.
You sure did.
We had a site out there, and we'd take and pull a 2-week summer camp out there. And then, they would stay out there for a week, and then the second week they would go up to Camp Shelby, and then I would have the mechanics take and pull and pack the wheel bearings and everything, and get all the salt water out of the wheels and make sure that the brakes worked and all, and then we'd bring them back to Ocean Springs.
So you would drive those old World War II ducks all the way up the old Highway 49 to Camp Shelby?
Right.
That was a long trip.
Well, we got, I think it was 17 brand new ducks that the Arkansas National Guard had in a warehouse. And I had to go up to Camp Robinson, which is outside of Little Rock, and we drove them back from there to Camp Shelby, and then went back up to Camp Shelby and brought them down to Ocean Springs.
Good gracious, how long did that take, Jerry? Days?
2 days.
2 days. And the average speed was?
Around 40, 45.
Wow, what a trip that was.
and we found out that they would run hot on driving them on the highway, so we get a Coke can, and there was always beer cans somewheres, and we put underneath the engine hatch cover, and that would let the fresh air come in there and cool it down, and you didn't have a heating problem.
GI ingenuity. So how you're working with the ducks, and you're practicing unloading the ships and bringing the supplies ashore, and you're based out of Point Cadet. At some point, you had to transition to something that was a little newer and probably more reliable and didn't rust as much, right?
Right. Well, the Lock 5, which a lot of people still call them ducks, and they so used to anything went in the water and come back out and went down the highway, they call it a duck. But Lock 5 was designed by the Transportation Corps, and they tested it, and then when we was reorganized underneath their setup and company, then we would travel out to Ship Island.
All the way to Ship Island. That's a long trip.
It's good ways, and we what they had a quarantine station back there before it got, tore up and all, and around the trees is where we used to bivouac, and then we make another water march back and to Deer Island, then we clean everything up and bring it back to the point and over to Ocean Springs and start servicing them.
Jerry, we got to take a little break here. Don't go away, because when we come back, we're going to hear a story about Jerry Dildy and what he did in Hurricane Camille, for which he was awarded the Soldier's Medal. Don't go away, babe. We will come right back. Welcome back to Local Heroes. Tonight we're talking to Sergeant Charles, nicknamed Jerry Dildy, about his 41-and-a-half-year career in the Seabees and the Mississippi Army National Guard. Now, Jerry, when we went to the break, we were talking about the Lark 5, which was an improvement on the Ducks. I think it had an aluminum hull, diesel engine, which was better. But what I really want to talk about now is Hurricane Camille. What happened the night that Hurricane Camille hit the coast, and where were you, and what were you doing?
We was at the Armory there in the building that held the Seafood Museum. That was the main building. And the 47 hurricane, the water came as far as the flagpole. So we moved everything up to that building that we didn't move over to Ocean Springs to get out of the water. And we was relying on that to be the high water mark. But we was all in, there was just a skeleton crew of us in case we had to move stuff around if it got wet or anything and stack. And a group of them was stacking the supply room and our weapons racks and all up high. And that was late on, it hit at night. So it took 2 puffs of wind, and the water didn't come in the front of the building, it came in from the back. 1 puff, all of a sudden you had 2 feet of water inside the building, and then the next time the wind blew, you had 4 or 5 feet. So we had an a lock parked out front, just in case we needed to get out of there. And we all got on the lock, and instead of going around and going out through the gate, we just went through the fence and got on the road, and there we made a turn and went towards Rosetti's restaurant, there where the palace is.
But you weren't on the wheels. You were actually using it as a boat. That's how high the water was.
Right.
Okay.
And when we made the turn there on to Howard Avenue, we got something hung up and the marine propeller. And all of a sudden, there was a big racket, and they have a drive shaft that's sort of like a shear pin, where if something gets hung up in a prop, it would tear up and not tear up the transmissions and stuff. So I lifted the center hatches on there, and I seen it was tore up, so we was adrift then. And there was a house right in between Kovich's drugstore and the French Club. And I ran and went down in the bow hatch, grabbed the anchor line, and a couple of guys that was with me, they held one end, and I dove overboard and swam to this house, and we tied off the line to it, and there was two good-sized National Guard, and one of them was Pete Quave and Tom Cavanaugh. And when I got to the lock, they just reached over there and just yanked me straight out of the water.
Now, what you just said, Sergeant Dildy, sounded like you were on an afternoon swim in a calm sea. I'm sure that wasn't the case. The wind was blowing very, very, very hard, and the water was high, and you were fighting against a current. It couldn't have been an easy Sunday afternoon swim to that house.
No, I didn't take my wallet off, boots off, or nothing. What I was wearing is what I went overboard in.
So you didn't even think twice.
No.
You were not scared.
No, and I was kind of worried coming back. That's when I started getting tired.
So you didn't even think. You grabbed this anchor line, you dove overboard, and you swam to the house.
Right.
And the whole object of this game was to save yourself and also...
Right. If we wouldn't have tied off to that house and really went adrift, we'd end up somewhere out in Gulf Hills.
Wow, that would have been
because
bad.
we went straight over the point, over Back Bay, and if you look on the map and everything, Gulf Hills wasn't too far away.
So you get tied off to the house, and what happened then?
Well, every time a big puff of wind hit and you get a rise in the water, the house would lead the foundation, and the lock was tied to the house, so both of them would go up, and then they'd go down. And one of the guys that was with us got scared, and he decided he didn't want to ride in that lock, so the tin on the roof was tearing up, so he got in that house and got in the attic, and no sooner he got in the attic, he come flying out. He says, "You ain't gonna believe the size of the rats that's trying to save themselves inside that place."
So he wasn't scared to be in the lark anymore.
Right. And we had one guy that was with us. He was another full-time mechanic for the guards like I was. And the wind was blowing so hard, we thought he was having a heart attack. And come to find out, he didn't have a heart attack, but the wind was taking his breath away. So we had him all wrapped up in a piece of canvas, keeping him calm and everything and out of the wind. And we waited, and they finally sent another lock down, and they worked their way, and we waited for them to get to us. Then everybody got on it, and we went to Oak Street. When we crossed over the railroad track, there was a big shrimp boat sitting over the railroad track.
Now, the whole time, we want to make sure everybody understands you're not on wheels. You're acting like a boat.
Yeah, but right there at the railroad is about the highest point in Biloxi. So Back Bay and the front beach met at the railroad there on Point Cadet. So it was a little bit shallow there, and then we got on Division Street, and we started going down Division Street, and we got by Crawford, and we kept hearing some people hollering. So we stopped the lock, and there was a guy hanging on a telephone pole with a baby. And we got him and the baby off. And one of the caretakers for the National Guard, his mother lived there at the armory, and she was way up in age, so they gave her the baby to hold. And then there was another bunch of them was in some oak, at least some pecan trees, and they came and swam and got in the lock with us. And then we went on down Division, and then turned down Lemieux and got to the City Hall.
So this is in the height of the hurricane?
It was starting to go down a little bit, and we waited at the City Hall, and as soon as daybreak hit, we got on a lock and worked our way back down to the armory, because it was wide open and there was weapons. We had a full load of ammunition back then we kept at the armory. And we ended up digging in the mud and getting it cleaned up where we could put some cots and stay there and clean weapons and stayed on state duty for about 3 weeks.
Let's go back to the night of the hurricane, and you're swimming with the anchor rope. You were awarded the
Soldier's Medal,
which is the highest award
highest peacetime award you can get.
for bravery.
Right.
Just want to make sure we got that in there, Sergeant Dildy. So the hurricane hits, you go back to the armory, you're digging all of your equipment and supplies, weapons, ammunition out, trying to clean it up, save what you could. I guess all of your vehicles that were there or left there were basically underwater.
Right.
And then you were having to try to make them work.
Well, a unit from upstate came down, and I went and seen the maintenance people. They had a wrecker. So I hand receipted the wrecker, and all the trucks and Jeeps and everything that went underwater, I took and hooked onto them and brought them up to Camp Shelby.
One at a time.
One at a time.
I've known this man for a long time. He's probably one of the most resourceful individuals I've ever met, and I can believe that story. So you took them all up to Camp Shelby one at a time to try to save them.
Right, and they ran them through the field maintenance shop up there, which they washed them down and repacked the bearings and changed the oil and everything in them and got them operational.
I don't guess you got much sleep, did you, Sergeant Dildy?
No, because you had, by the time you think you're going to sleep, somebody holler, they having problems where they giving ice out. And there was so many people would try to get the ice, and there was arguments and everything. We had to go down there and kind of calm them down and everything.
Well, you're not going to believe this, but we're out of time for this show. But you're going to be back with us on the next one, and you're going to continue this exciting story of your military career.
Okay.
That's it for this show on Local Heroes. Please don't miss the next one, because we're going to continue this exciting career of Sergeant Charles Jerry Dildy, the Mississippi Army National Guard. Tune in next time for Local Heroes and hear the end of this wonderful story. Welcome to Local Heroes from the GI Museum in Goshen, Mississippi, here on WKFK TV7. This is the second part of a two-part series, and we're talking with Sergeant Charles Jerry Dildy, a 41-and-a-half-year veteran of the Navy Seabees and the Mississippi Army National Guard. I have to tell you, it's an honor and it's a privilege not only to be talking to Sergeant Dildy, but to also have donated to the museum by Sergeant Dildy a very special uniform. It has a patch on the uniform that you probably won't see anywhere else, and I think it was an unauthorized patch, wasn't it, Sergeant Dildy?
Right. And
it's a patch, and it has a duck, I mean not a duck, a lark on the patch. And tell us a little bit about that, if you would, Sergeant Dildy.
Well, one of the full-time employees decided he'd draw up a patch and everything. And General Monroe was battalion commander, and he kind of liked it and all, and so we put it on. But the regular army, they didn't approve of it. But the state, as long as we was in the state here, we wore them.
And there was something else that you guys wore that the regular army didn't like too, wasn't it?
Right, because my maintenance section had black hats. Everybody else had OD hats. And that way I can see one of my mechanics in a field of a bunch of other guys, and if he's not working, I can get on him right then and there, or somebody can tell me where he's at.
That is the Sergeant Dildy that I know. If you're not working, he's going to get on you. That's great. Now, in our last show, Sergeant Dildy, we had just talked about Hurricane Camille and what you did in Hurricane Camille. You were awarded the Soldier's Medal for it, saving those lives, swimming with the anchor rope. After the hurricane, you went back to the armory. You were cleaning up your equipment. You were cleaning up your weapons. You were cleaning up everything that got damaged in the hurricane. You were taking the vehicle one at a time back to Camp Shelby behind a borrowed wrecker.
Right.
And we were talking about you might not have gotten any sleep.
No, well, we was sleeping on cots and everything, and I had a pickup truck at the house, so we found us a Jeep, and we ran over the bridge and got that pickup truck back over to the armory, and that's what we would use to go to different people's houses. And they would cook something, and they would bring it back down to us for us to eat. And if you'd have looked around, a lot of Jeeps didn't have a spare tire on it. But if you looked at that pickup truck, it had Jeep tires on it. Because every time we had a flat, we went to a Jeep and just got the tire off of it and put it on the truck.
So you worked in and around the city of Biloxi and Ocean Springs after the hurricane.
Right.
Now, after the hurricane's over, you're still in the Mississippi Army National Guard. Did you stay at the Point Cadet Armory for a time and then get transferred somewhere else? What happened after that?
Well, they right after the hurricane, they sent me back to Ocean Springs as motor sergeant to keep the locks running. And I stayed there until we was reorganized into a supply and service company. And that's when I put in my retirement for civil service and got out of civil service. But I stayed in the National Guard, and so I was eligible to be promoted outside the maintenance field. And they said if you go to first sergeant school and go first sergeant board and be boarded, and then you become the first sergeant. So, and I did that, and they needed a battalion motor sergeant. So they come to me and transferred me back over to Biloxi headquarters as battalion motor sergeant, and which was the NCO in charge of the S4 section. So I stayed with them until was too old to be in the National Guard. My 60th birthday is when they retired me.
Yeah, I can remember that.
Right, you was there and you put on a display and everything.
I remember that. I remember that. I want to jump back just a minute. I don't want to forget this little story that you told. When you went to summer camp on Deer Island one time, was it in the Larks or was it in the Ducks that you actually hoisted the battalion commander's Jeep into?
Oh, we was in the Ducks then. And the only people that had an A-frame to pick up stuff was the maintenance duck. So we loaded the Jeep up in the back of a duck, drove it over to Deer Island, got underneath a big oak tree, put a chain fall up there, and we lifted the Jeep out of the duck and then drove the duck off and then dropped the Jeep back down on the ground.
And who was the commanding officer?
General Monroe. He was Captain Monroe then.
And
And Sergeant Paludi was in our mess section.
Adelke Paludi
Right.
was in your mess section. That's amazing. We had a Mr. Paludi on our show recently.
Right. And, well, him and I been friends ever since I got in the National Guard and he got in the National Guard, and he retired out as Command Sergeant Major for Special Forces.
So your commander at the time, Tommy Monroe, he had a Jeep that he preferred over anything else.
M38 Jeep, because it had the old model fenders on it, and he can always put his foot on the outside the Jeep and rest it on the fender.
And the story is he tried to keep that in the battalion motor pool forever because he wanted to put his foot outside on the fender.
Right, and right now he has a restored M38 Jeep.
What a story. What a story. So you retired at age 60, of course, from the Armory at Hilder Park. Is there any other milestone that you may have reached while you were in the National Guard you want to tell us about, Sergeant Dildy?
Well, in '73, the Delta flooded. So they sent me and a couple of guys up with 2 logs. And we thought we was just going to leave them up there in Vicksburg and then come back home. They said, no, you staying. And we worked the flood. We was up there for about 45 days, going to different farms and everything. Cotton fields was completely underwater, and running around and getting people out of their house. And before the house went underwater, you know, let them get their furniture and stuff out. And
now, I remember seeing 8mm movies that you had with the convoy going up Highway 49 when it was a 2-lane road.
Right.
And I also remember some funny things that happened at Camp Shelby about the 2.5-ton truck with the swimming pool in the back. Can you tell us that story?
That was at the wash rack. We had a 1.5-ton trailer behind a 2.5-ton, and the guys in my maintenance section was washing it down, and they plugged all the holes up and the tailgate up where it would hold water. So they would dive out of the back of the 2.5-ton into the trailer that was full of water. And you did not get very close to where they was at, because if you did, you'd been washed away because they put the hose on you.
Another funny story. You spent many a summer camp at Camp Shelby, no doubt, and you did a lot of things up there at Camp Shelby. Is there anything else memorable that happened while you were at Camp Shelby or while you were in the Guard?
Well, just about every time there was a hurricane until I got out of the Guard, and I either spent time at the Armory or in the maintenance shop, and then if we was put on state duty, I was already there. And one time we had to move all our vehicles over in Biloxi. We had 3 units then. We had a field artillery unit, and then another truck company, and plus headquarters. We took all their trucks and everything up to the football field up by Lee Street, Yankee Stadium.
Yes.
And we parked everything up there, and I ended up being the night watchman and had to sit during the bad weather in the back of a deuce and a half and watching everything.
How ironic. You spend Hurricane Camille in a lark, and then you spend another hurricane in the back of a 2.5-ton truck in the foul weather. What duty that was. What duty that was. Well, Sergeant Dildy, it's about time for us to take another break. And don't go away. We'll come right back with more of this very interesting story from Sergeant Charles Jerry Dildy, right here on WKFK TV7. Welcome back to Local Heroes here on WKFK TV7. We're talking to Sergeant Jerry Dildy about his career in the Mississippi Army National Guard and the Seabees. 41 and a half years, as a matter of fact. Sergeant Dildy, we left off before the break, and you had just retired from the 138th Service and Supply at Hiller Park in Biloxi. And after you retired from the Guard, I know you've been in the mechanic work all your life.
Right.
And your father was into managing seafood plants, right, when you were younger? And you were, of course, around shrimp boats. Right.
My uncles was boat builders.
And you had your own, or still have your own shrimp boat.
Right.
And some of your other hobbies are racing motorcycles?
Right, until I retired last year.
You retired from racing motorcycles. How many motorcycles do you have now, Sergeant Dildy?
I would guess about 14 motorcycles. Some of them completed, and some of them needs to be restored, and some of them are being restored.
So you're still being a mechanic.
Right.
And you're still enjoying that. What about any other mechanical pursuits that you have?
I have two Model Ts. One of them is 1919 that has a reproduction body, and that's a copy of what was used during World War I. And I have what they call a brass speedster, a race car. It's a 1914.
Now you completely, absolutely restore these vehicles from the top down.
Started from the frame up.
Frame up. You also have another interest in the marine field.
Yes, running. I got a 35-foot Lafitte that I used to use for shrimping. Now it ended up as a sport fishing boat. All I got is riding reels on it instead of a net.
And you're part of a military vehicle collectors club, I know.
Right, the Coast Watches.
And you attend parades with your father?
Right. Since the Coast Watch has been getting involved with military vehicles in parades, I usually stayed away from them. And so when they going on a parade or a military display somewhere, I cranked the Model T up and we were ready to go.
That's good. So your military career has basically spilled over into your hobby, where you're restoring motorcycles, you're racing motorcycles, and you race these motorcycles down in Daytona?
Daytona and Talladega. They have a small race course there, and they call it Talladega International. And also Birmingham has a race course there, Barber Motorsports. And I've been as far west as Steamboat Springs and raced in the middle of the town.
So you've been racing up till you retired last year, you said?
Right.
You're a brave man, Sergeant Dildy. I also know that you participated in a big display at the local community college. I think it was last year, where you had a lot of your motorcycles and your racing leathers, was it?
Right. Yeah, we brought, I have a 350 Harley Davidson road racer. And right now it's being punished. And
punished?
Right, because 3 years ago it spit me off down in Daytona and put me in the infield hospital.
Uh-oh.
And it kind of messed my leg up a little bit, and the nerves and everything on it. So I just use it for display now. And then the doctor has put me on some medicine that you don't want to race a motorcycle or operate some dangerous machinery, because it throws your timing off and make you drowsy.
Oh, okay. But you're still rebuilding Model Ts, and you're still into the motorcycles as far as rebuilding them and restoring them.
Right.
And you will help anybody that asks fix their military vehicle. You're a wealth of information, and believe me, I know, because I've asked you 100,000 questions before. Sergeant Dildy is an absolute open book as far as information on military vehicles, from World War II all the way up to what?
Well, the Hummer was the newest thing came out, and when it came out, I had to go up to Shelby, go to a school and everything, and be certified to come back and teach Hummer driving. And same way with the 151 Jeep. And there's a special school you had to go through because they had so many of the Jeeps flipping and hurting people.
If you had to pick one, though, over your entire 41-and-a-half-year military career, Sergeant Dildy, what was your favorite military vehicle to work on and to drive?
The Larks.
The Larks. Why am I not surprised? Now, the Lark was a really special vehicle. It didn't
Right.
have a steel hull on it.
No, it was an aluminum hull, had a 300 Cummins V8 in the back of it.
Which is a diesel.
Is full diesel, and it'll run around 8 knots
In the water.
in the water. And I had more fun taking the special forces from Fort Bragg used to come down with the RB-15 rubber boats, and I used to take them out in the Gulf. It was a lot cheaper running a Lark than a submarine, so they practiced putting rubber boats overboard and then paddling from out around Horn Island into Gulf Park Estates. And then they have a 130 come in and land and pick them up, and then they go somewhere else and make a jump.
I don't think the people that are residents of Gulf Park Estates may have realized that they were being invaded by the special forces all these years.
Right. Well, they would bring the 130 in with the lights out on the runway and everything. And
At what is now the Ocean Springs Airport?
right.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Now, you love the Lark. You love to work on it. And you would take the Lark, I understand, all the way out to Ship Island.
Right.
What kind of seas would this vehicle take? I mean,
You could do 360 rollover. In fact, it had seat belts in it.
so you could roll the Lark 360 degrees and it would still float?
Right. Because when you dog all the hatches now, you made it waterproof. And there's a bulkhead right behind the driver's seat that has where it picks up the air. And when you put a cargo load, you put it in the center of the Lark, and you don't tie it down. Because if you tie it down, then and you got more underwater, like a tugboat, than what you got above the water.
Okay, Sergeant Dildy, this is a question I've got to ask. Have you ever turned a Lark 360 degrees?
No, but we was in some rough water off Port St. Joe, and I had a freezer unit sitting in the Lark, and a couple of times the side seas hit me, and I thought I was going to lose that freezer unit. Of course, it wasn't tied down. It had just fell off, and the Lark would right itself up again.
Now, Port St. Joe, that's down in Florida.
Right.
And y'all would go down there with a ship that came out of the
Mobile Bay.
Mobile Bay, and it was a special ship that was run by the Army Reserve.
Right.
And y'all would go out to that ship off of Florida, and you would practice unloading the ship and bringing the supplies into the beach?
Right. We had an Army Reserve unit, and that was a Lark unit from Palatka, Florida. And we worked with them. Well, the first week, we unloaded the ship. Then the second week, they were supposed to take all the stuff and put it back on the ship. Well, we ended up had to help them to get all the stuff that we unloaded back on the ship.
And are there any units in the United States military now still using the Larks?
There's some, well, let's see, when we got reorganized, we turned over, I think it was 35 late model series Larks over to the Seabees. And they used it for the underwater construction. And as far as I know of, they still got a, in the storage compound over there.
Speaking of the Seabees, I want to touch on this story briefly before we run out of time. You mentioned seeing a very unique, rare, and one-of-a-kind vehicle one time at the Seabee base in Gulfport. Can you tell us about that?
Right. Higgins was, transportation, Army Transportation Corps was working on the logs. Then your Ordnance Corps was working on the Drake, which was a 5-ton duck. And Higgins, they had, it looked like a big mike boat, and it had 4 wheels, with each wheel had electric motor, and it had ramps where they would slide up and down, and they had a deal that, looked like something that when you hit the beach, it start pulling you up on the beach where you could drop your tires and drive. And it had like 2 big outdrives on the back of it for marine propulsion in the water. But it never did turn out. So they had it in the salvage yard over in Gulfport, and we was there picking up all the excess Quonset huts and 40 by 80 elephant huts and bringing them up to Shelby. And that's where I seen it. And I have a book at the house, and I ran across, and they have a picture of it.
So you've seen the only experimental version of that military vehicle.
It was scrapped.
Yeah, sad but true. Sir Dildy, we're out of time. I really do appreciate it. You joining me on this show. We thank you for your service, your 41 and a half years of service in the Seabees and the Mississippi Army National Guard. Thank you for being here. You've been watching Local Heroes here from the GI Museum and on WKFK TV7 in Pascagoula, your station for Jackson County, Mississippi. Join us again next week for another wonderful story from one of your local veterans. Thank you.